Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final webinar in our series, Academic Integrity, Urgent and Emerging Topics. I'm your convener today, Sarah Elaine Eaton, here today in my capacity as the Educational Leader in Residence for Academic Integrity through the Taylor Institute. We'd like to begin our session today by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, and Piikani and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, including the Wesley, Bearspaw, and Chiniki First Nations. And taking a moment also to recognize that the city of Calgary is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And I'll take a moment to invite you to reflect on the traditional territories that you may be joining us from if you're not located in Treaty 7 today. In terms of a little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to our presenters, just to let you know that your mics as participants are muted during the webinar. The text chat is available to you at any time. We invite your comments and questions throughout. And then typically what we do is we're going to take a little pause in the middle of the webinar, and I'll field your questions to the presenters. And so they'll have time to answer your questions at the beginning, or sorry, at the middle of the webinar, and again at the end. And I'll write down any questions that come in between so that all of the questions can be fielded. Today's webinar is being recorded. The recording will be made publicly available in about a week or so. Participant names and other identifying information are removed from the recording, so don't worry about that. And although this is our final session in our series, we have one more event coming up. And our next webinar will actually be a book launch. This is a moment of shameless self-promotion for my new book, Plagiarism in Higher Education, Tackling Tough Topics in Academic Integrity. That's going to be on Friday, May 7th. And Helen, our production coordinator today, has the link so you can register if you're interested in joining us for that. Thanks, Helen, for posting that in the chat box. And with that, I'm going to take a moment to introduce our two wonderful presenters. Thank you so much to Ryan Morrison and Mike Minczak for joining us today. Ryan Morrison is an English language and communications professor with the Center of Preparatory and Liberal Studies at George Brown College in Toronto, Ontario. He's fulfilling the role of an educational technologist within the school. And outside of the classroom, he investigates trends like artificial intelligence and digital tools for 21st century education. And Michael Minczak, joining us today from Brock University, also in Ontario, is an educator and educational researcher interested in the intersections of work, schooling, and society. More specifically, his research focuses on educational policy issues, the sociology of work, as well as the technology in the contemporary period. So welcome to both of you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand things over to you. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Welcome, everyone.
At the beginning, there we go. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Today, we're just going to be looking at the impacts of text generators and text generating technology on academic integrity. We're both kind of coming at this from different perspectives, and we'll get to that a little bit more later. But yeah, Mike, anything you want to say before we start?
Thanks, Ryan. I'll leave it to you. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. As Ryan mentioned, what we'll do today, and he'll go over the agenda in a minute, is kind of looking at this new technology, specifically GPT-3, which is a bit of a mouthful, and looking at it in terms of what exactly it is, what is this sort of technology, trying to explain how it's developed and what's going on, because the field and the technology is developing really, really rapidly. Ryan and I are chatting and looking at articles, sharing information on a week-to-week basis, really, as things evolve. And so things are moving really fast. And so we want to kind of give an overview of the field and where things stand today. And then from there, we'll pause for some questions midway before getting into some more theoretical questions, looking at the ideas around academic integrity and what that might mean for students, for educators, and for researchers in the contemporary period and moving forward. So we hope today is sort of, looking at emergent and urgent issues, as the webinar suggests, and hopefully just to start a conversation. Hopefully to have people like yourselves interested in this topic and things like that, who want to think about academic integrity, looking at what the very near future might hold for us. So we welcome many questions. I think a lot of these topics, we don't necessarily have the answers to them, but we need to start at least having those conversations and thinking about what they might mean for us in our different capacities within higher education specifically, but in terms of education more broadly as well. So we look forward to that, and Ryan will get us started for the first part of our presentation.
Great, thanks, Mike. So yeah, we are going to start with at the beginning. We're going to start at the beginning of algorithms with Alan Turing. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Alan Turing, the computer scientist, and behind his namesake, the Turing tests. Basically, a Turing test is you have a human input and you have a computer input, and it's up to the evaluator to decide, you have an input and then you have a computer output and a human output, and it's up to the evaluator to decide which is which. So we're going to start with that. So you are going to be the judge. I'm going to show you a couple, I'm going to show you a prompt, and then I'm going to show you the output. One is from a computer and one is from a human. And yeah, so let's get started with that. So the prompt is eat everything on your plate. So I'm going to put the two texts up. I'll give you, I'm going to say 2 minutes to read them over and try and guess. And maybe you can put in the chat which one you think, which one would be, which one is which. So I'll give you 2 minutes for that.
So Ryan, just to clarify, you asking folks to write like the left-hand column they think is either written by a human or written by a text generator, or the right-hand column?
Microphone, sorry.
Yes, let's go with the left side, your left. The first one, eat everything on your plate, period, will be the left side, and eat everything on your plate will be the right side. I'll give you about 45 more seconds left on the clock. A lot of people saying left side is computer. All right. So, just got to get back to there. Yes, the right side was a human and the left side was a computer. So this one on the left side is actually from a predecessor of the current algorithm GPT-3. This is from GPT-2, and it's from a platform that was called Talk to Transformer, which was hosted by a man in Toronto named Adam King. And he actually is now doing a second platform with GPT-3 called InferKit. We're going to see an example of that in a minute. So yeah, you know, we should also acknowledge that the human did have some algorithmic help, things like spell checker, you know, and the tools that are available within Microsoft Word are a version of algorithmic assistance, but this one on the left, this was one try and it was completed in 10 seconds. So you can start to see some of the differences here. Let's go to the next one. This one is You Are Lost in the Forest. So I'll put 2 more minutes on the clock. I'm seeing the chat from Jenny. Yes, I'll speak to that actually in a second, what some of the differences are. This one is a little bit more obvious, but I'll be talking later on more about that as well, about some of the giveaways of what GPT-3 text looks like. But as you can see, it is very difficult to distinguish, just kind of sitting and looking. So You Are Lost in the Forest and You Got Lost Because You Did Not Listen to the Trees will be the right side. Lost in the Forest, I become convinced that something is stalking me is the left side. Someone voting for right by human. Someone taking the counter argument there, the counter position. All right. So let's take a look at this one. This one's a little bit more difficult. It has a little bit more, as you can see, a little bit more diversity in the chat about which one is human, which one is computer. The left one is computer. And it's funny, one thing that you'll notice here is, and this is how I know this person, and I was able to identify it. He uses a lot of M dashes. So you can see that's something that I don't see a lot of in the GPT-3 text. Also, his partner was able to identify very quickly and say, oh, that's my guy right there. I know his writing. And then the second one is, again, GPT-3. So this is interesting that the group is being fooled a little bit more by this one, because this is the next iteration of GPT, which stands for, sorry, I don't think I've defined that, generative pre-trained transformer. The right side provoked a feeling, it scared me. Yes, that's kind of, that a computer can do that is something that is definitely concerning. It did take a few times to get it to write something that was, that I considered acceptable. So that was 3 tries on the InferKit platform. Okay. Now this one, we're not going to do a Turing test with it, but this is something, a new function on one of the platforms that basically tried to include these words. So I put in our host, Sarah Eaton's name, and I asked kind of a loaded question: who is the preeminent academic researcher in Canada? Sorry, I'm gonna minimize the chat so I stop laughing at random times. Yes, this was one try, and hold on, my presentation's being a little weird here. There we go. So the first part of it was presented as a fact, and there is some truth to it, which was very interesting. It was also able to identify the conversation, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's an academic newsletter publisher, and many of you have written in it, including Sarah. And it was able to generate that, which I'm still trying to figure out how it did that. I don't know if, I know the conversation's open, like anyone can read it, but I'm still trying to figure out if it got that from like its source material, like the conversation may be included in the algorithm, which again, I have to do more investigation. You'll also notice that there were some, it was very flattering. Sarah was a little, when I asked her, she said, this is a little bit editorial, but that this, you know, the algorithm is able to produce pretty accurate, true facts. However, when I asked it to continue, this is what it produced, and there's no truth to this. And even you'll start to see things now, like Sarah's definition of academic integrity is clear and concise, and then it goes on with a not so clear and not so concise definition. So these are the types of things that the more you read, the more you start to see what it's good at and what it's not good at. It also, at the end, the final paragraph, you'll notice that it does that thing that we, if anyone here is a language arts teacher, it does that thing that we love in thesis statements where it says, here's the 3 reasons, first, second, and third, and it lays it out in that nice academic style. Yeah, but again, all this stuff about McGinty and the Globe and Mail. So it was able to identify that, you know, since we had Canada and in the inputs, it was able to pull different Canadian content, which is interesting. Anyway, we're going to take a look at the timeline. It's a very short timeline from basically when GPT-2 was first exhibited, February 2019. I know it seems like such a long time ago, but really just a little bit over 2 years ago. GPT-2 was first exhibited by OpenAI. So OpenAI is a group, or it's not quite a company. It's a we'll call it a technology company because they are starting to monetize as technology companies do. OpenAI was put together by a bunch of Silicon Valley founders with the intention of keeping powerful AI out of the hands of potential bad actors. So they wanted to make it public so everyone has access to it, hence the name OpenAI. So OpenAI, they do a lot of stuff. It's not just GPT-3. They have a lot of different projects going on. But they started to show what GPT-2 is capable of. And they decided originally not to release it to the public because they thought it was very dangerous. They thought that this could be used to produce, you know, the more you think about it, fake news, you know, the disruptive power of this, they were really concerned about until a very short time later, 8 months later, and they said, you know what, that's fine, let's just release it. So several platforms were given access to it, and then the public was given access to it as well. So you could start to play with GPT-2. And then again in the fall 2020, so a little bit less than a year later, they started to release, not publicly, very much the same way they did before, kind of a limited release of GPT-3, the next iteration. And some of you may be familiar with the Guardian's article. A robot wrote this article, "Are you scared yet, human?" You may have seen this. It got a lot of shares and went somewhat viral. And so GPT-3 was now out there, but it was not publicly available until winter 2020, when it became available last year. And Microsoft has begun to, there's a connection between Microsoft and OpenAI. Microsoft, because they are such a huge company and have a lot of servers, they host a lot of, I think all of OpenAI's projects. So they are given access to the algorithms. And now here we are, that there are several different platforms available for GPT-3. And we're beginning to see changes in these platforms. They're able to do purpose-built functions, and we'll look at a couple of those now, actually. Oh yeah, this is just those articles that you may have seen. You know, there's a lot of, the first article again from last year, and this one very recently, that there's these articles that they're exhibiting, hey, this article was written by AI. If you want to pop out your phones and save some of these platforms to play around with this afternoon, have some fun this weekend maybe. The first one is InferKit, which I've talked about previously. I recently had to, I think they said I was supposed to get 300,000 words for free, but I don't think they quite gave me that. They put me behind a paywall recently, but that's fine. Copy AI is very interesting. This one, it's a 7-day free trial, and I'll show you in a second what Copy AI is doing. And a headline as well is both of the Copy AI and Headline are both built for copywriters, people who create content. So currently, and this was just very recently, you can see here that more than 3,000 applications are now using GPT-3, and tens of thousands of developers around the globe are building on our platform, and they currently generate 4.5 billion words per day, and they continue to scale production traffic. So this is urgent and emergent. You could definitely, this definitely qualifies as that. The known capabilities, it generates in all modern major European languages, and it can also do simplified Mandarin Chinese. And some platforms also include translate functions, so you can create something and then quickly translate it into many different languages. It can be adjusted and retrained for writing styles. So again, there are kind of slider options on some platforms that you can decide how you want to generate it. So different platforms have different approaches to that. The one we'll be looking at in a second, Copy AI, actually has a list for that. It can also do basic coding tasks. It can write computer code. And also there's a company that's using GPT-3 to create images. So if you write the image of an armchair in the shape of an avocado, the output will be images. And these are all original images that it creates from its algorithm. So yes, lots of interesting things happening there. This is Copy AI. And this is just a quick kind of me scrolling through the different things that it can create. So you'll see in there essay outlines and essay introductions, among other things. But again, these are all different types of writing that GPT-3 has been trained to do in the Copy AI platform. What are its strengths? We're going to talk a little bit here about, someone in the chat was asking about how to tell what is computer generated text. But let's look at the strengths first. Like I said, it's open. Basically, anyone can access the algorithm. You just need to ask and they'll give it to you. Part of the problem with that, though, is because it's so big, it's very costly. It's not cheap to run these. And actually, the person who made Talk to Transformer and now runs InferKit, they lost tens of thousands of dollars on Talk to Transformer hosting it. And that was just for GPT-2. GPT-3 is 100 times larger than GPT-2. So you can imagine what the costs might be. As you've seen, it generates very quickly, and it can be adjusted for specific tasks. The grammar is largely accurate. We'll see an example in a minute. It does make some mistakes sometimes, but they are very discrete. It's not something that is consistent. Again, can be great for getting over writer's block. It just generates ideas. If you're ever stuck for an idea, pop open a text generator, put in what you're thinking about, and it'll give you some ideas. And then again, everything is original. So this is something, it's not drawing, what it creates is not like from Wikipedia or anything like that. It's original and it will disappear if you don't use it. So things like Turnitin or safe assign will not detect it. And this is kind of starting to hint at what Mike's going to be talking about in a couple minutes. What are its weaknesses? As we saw, it makes up facts and stories to fit the prompt. It's not true. It doesn't attribute its research. I had one the other month that it said, you know, Thomas Jefferson was one of the signatories at the Paris Accord. And we know, of course, that, and this is the Paris Accord concerning climate change. And of course, we know Thomas Jefferson was a signatory on important documents, but not that specific document. So you'll see those kinds of anachronistic mistakes that it might make. Also, if you just kind of let it go and you don't edit or stop it, it really strays from the thesis or the topic at hand. It just goes and goes and goes. And what it creates, where it ends up might be miles and miles away from the thesis or the topic at hand. So it has that quality of writing that you might see when people are under stress and they just write and write and write and write. It does the same thing. And again, this is an interesting reflection of our writing, right? What does our writing look like? This is based on that. So it's getting this from somewhere. It also uses a lot of empty phrases, seemingly to expand word count. So again, if you're putting in that type of, or that type of writing was being used, where word counts have, you know, been important, but students know the tricks to get around that. Another good one was, what was it? The thing about X is that X is, and then it goes into what it says, the content, but it has a lot of those kind of word strategies that students use to expand their word count. It also makes occasional logical errors and contradicts itself. Yeah, a lot of times, if you read carefully, there are a lot of logical, well, not a lot, there are occasional logical errors. This, just a quick little, we talked earlier about the grammar problems. Here is a good example. Despite having one of the best developing financial systems in standardized form, our youth are more financial illiterate than most. This was something about, I was creating content. And yeah, so again, financially literate and developed standard financial systems. So you'll see a lot of that as well. So in short, it's currently about a C student for academic purposes. It's not producing anything great. nothing groundbreaking, and there are a lot of problems with its writing, but it's passable. And a recent study actually confirms this, where college professors were blind grading GPT-3 writing, GPT-3 written assignments alongside student work. And GPT-3 was able to achieve C+ and B- grades on academic essays, which, if you think about it, is kind of the range that we get from our students. GPT-3 also required significant prompting, though, when it was a creative task. So one of the tasks was for a creative writing course, and it was not able to achieve a decent creative writing narrative, even with significant prompting. So for all of you aspiring novelists out there, you don't have to worry about GPT-3 taking over that task anytime soon. Some other things to note. There are other text generators out there. GPT-3 is just kind of the best public one right now. There are other ones that are trying to draw directly from the internet and provide references. So even though GPT-3 is not as capable as you know our A+ students, there are other things on the horizon. And also there have been attempts to create detection software. GLTR was somewhat successful for detecting GPT-2, but GPT-3's algorithm is 1,000 times larger. So there's complications, obviously, with that. And I could never get GLTR to work on its platform. And there's links in our references for that if you want to investigate that a little bit more. That's the end of the first part of our presentation. And we just want to take a minute now to answer any questions you might have about the technical aspects of GPT-3 and other text generating technology.
Ryan, we did have a couple of questions come in as you were talking, and I've noted them down. And when you were presenting those two texts side by side, Jenny asked a question. She said, are you saying that a red flag for something that is artificial intelligence generated is that it contains irrelevant content? And her argument is that students do that too. So I wondered if you could comment on that. Yes,
students definitely do that. For me, it's again, this is, and Mike's probably going to get into, well, Mike is going to get into this a little bit more later. What are we going to do with things like assessing grammar and assessing, based on word count? Are these things that we're going to have to look at changing if if this technology becomes more pervasive? Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
No, we'll talk about some ideas around academic integrity. I think what Ryan pointed out there is, at the moment, because of some of the grammar issues and some of the ways in which the program works, especially if you play around with it, you can start to see some of these differences between what we can call human text or machine text. But again, I guess what we want to get into, and we're highlighting this, is that this is what it looks like now. We don't know what some of these might look like in a month, in 6 months, in a year from now, right? As many of these platforms can and will be refined, right? So people are developing platforms specifically for certain fields or to create certain content. So while we can identify red flags now, and that's a good point, right, as Ryan noted, one of the most important determinants of that was context. He knew the writer, and thus he was able to more readily distinguish, right? And we can get into some of those discussions around, well, how do we learn from our students' writing? How might we think about evaluation and scaffolding and things like that? So again, we can look for some red flags and we can start to thinking about differentiating it. But at the same time, there are sort of tricky and sticky questions within there as well.
Terrific, thanks. We've had 3 more questions come in, so we can go through them quickly. The reader's asked, why was this technology developed, and could you describe a good application of this technology? I think by good, she's talking about ethical.
Yes, and this is a question that comes up that I've had at several several presentations that I've done. ESL teachers and language teachers saying, "Who would do this? Why are they doing this?" This is part of, and I see in the chat people are using NLP, which is kind of the broader field of study. NLP is natural language processing, and it's something that it's the melding of, you know, it's linguistics and it's computers. An interesting thing that I saw the other day, it's not in this presentation, but someone's using this for a computer game where you can talk to a character. So maybe they're, and it's, you can talk to them about, you know, from the, it goes text to speech into the character, and the character uses GPT-3 to produce conversation, which maybe there's therapeutic uses for that. You know, so far as good purposes for this, it's kind of a wait and see. And we're gonna, I keep saying this phrase, we're gonna talk more about that later. When we talk about copyright and ownership, how is that gonna change? When is that gonna change? These are all questions that we haven't answered yet, because this is still so new that it's very hard to keep up with it. Sorry, I can't, I don't know, Mike, do you want to add anything there?
Well, and another point we can take is, while when you look at in AI, when it was founded, they talked about, you know, a sort of ethical philanthropic type of mission statement sort of thing going on, but we see kind of the people who are involved in, they're heavyweights in the technology industry. And, you know, we can't ignore the fact that a lot of these AI tools and things are being developed for profit-making purposes, right? So while right now they're letting people kind of play around with it, effectively they're laying the foundation for saying, well, this GPT-3 is the best program out there, and so if you want to use it, we'll license it to you, and things like that. And companies, we can conceive, well, you can use this for, you know, innumerable purposes, for you know, chatbots or responding to emails and things like that. So there's definitely a profit motive embedded in there too. But now we're seeing it kind of reaching the confines of education in our classrooms.
Terrific, thanks for that. Okay, 2 more questions. Kelly's asked, is it neural net based, and where does the learning set come from? For example, Turnitin or somewhere else?
From what I understand, it was open source. It was just originally from open source texts. GPT-2 was, and you're making me think here, I think it was 40 gigabytes of raw text. So if you think about that, that's you know, millions and millions of words, and GPT-3 is about 100 times that. So I think that's 4 terabytes. Again, I don't have my calculator or handy, but yeah, it's huge. So where it comes from, I can't say. I haven't found exactly where it's come from, other than that it's from open source text sources. I don't know, Mike, do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, I believe the model is the same thing. It trained from open source things, so things like Wikipedia and open source text, and yeah, something like 4.5 billion parameters or pages, whatever that might be. So, you know, a lot of text. What's interesting about GPT-3 is that this is sort of a platform from which now other developers can jump off of. So for example, now or in the future, let's say somebody wanted to make a platform that just focuses on writing about 17th century medieval history, or sorry, I should say 13th century. I'm a historian, right? They could find a bunch of articles or books or whatever and just train the platform on that text, which would then produce writing and essays just focused on 13th century medieval history and things like that. So we can see how the tool being broad and having issues can and will be refined continually from this point by other developers and people interested in doing this in different subject areas and for different purposes.
Okay, this is fascinating. Okay, so a couple more questions and then we'll hand it back to you. So I'm going to ask them together and then we'll close this question period and hand it back to you. So question 1 from Greg: in the future, could we foresee writing instructors requiring non-fungible tokens, NFTs, for writing assignments? That's question 1. Question 2 is in from Kelly, and with regards to the source material, how about open text academic journal publications? I think she's asking about that from, they're asking about that from a text sort of source rather than text generation, but we'll be interested in your comments on both of those and then we'll hand it back to you.
As far as NFTs, I'm not totally familiar with exactly how those work. I do understand that they are based on cryptocurrency and that they have, they use blockchain technology to, identify that this is student work. I don't know, or that to verify things. I don't know how that would work with NFTs. I would love to hear your thoughts. That could be something that we consider in the future, that we use blockchain technology. I was at a conference and I saw, this is getting a little off topic, for diplomas and degrees, there's a company called BlockCerts that's using blockchain to verify diplomas so that companies can just go into a digital platform instead of that whole runaround that everyone here is probably familiar with when someone needs to have a degree verified by a school or by an employer. You have to go ask the admissions office for it and they mail it. So I can see that technology being used. I'm not totally sure how that would work with GPT-3 text. I don't know, Mike, what do you think?
Maybe we'll have a follow-up question after. Again, I'm not an expert in crypto and things like that either. Again, one of the interesting questions which we'll bring up soon is that while GPT-3 can produce this text in many ways, and the text is original. And so if that text was produced and someone signed off on it with an NFT or whatever, they're still creating something original per se. And thus it could say it's theirs. Then again, as we'll get into, there are now broader questions around if a computer creates something, can that be copywritten? Is that open source material? Because a robot does copyright only apply to humans? And so these are some of the legal copyright questions which we can get into as well. Which again, I don't have an answer to. It's more for discussion, but I could see it connecting to that as well.
Okay, are we good for questions at this point?
Yes, yeah, please carry on.
Okay, so I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thank you. So for the second part here, what I'm going to do is start to, again, kind of make some connections to academic integrity and some of these sort of, ethical questions that I'm sure many of you have already been thinking about. What do we have to fear from these robots and things like that. So I'll look at it from 3 perspectives. We'll go over them. So what I want you perhaps to think about is put yourself in the shoes, right? And you might take on these roles of a student, of a teacher, an educator, or as a researcher. And we'll look at, again, some of these dynamics and what they might mean for each kind of case. And I put in a little case study, which we can go over, highlighting some of this as well. So I'll run through this, and then hopefully that'll bring us towards some further discussion towards the end. So let's start with the student perspective, which I'm sure we're all interested in, those of us who teach. Fundamentally, the key issue here is that students will be at the vanguard of this, right? We know that students tend to be ahead of the curve in terms of technology and application and things like that. They are very innovative, and they will find ways to use this, especially as it becomes more and more readily available, right? So students will be using this. And in fact, students are already using some of these tools to enhance academic writing and things like that. We can take the extension of tools that we're already using, right? Like predictive text. Maybe some of you have used Grammarly. Many of these things are being integrated into Microsoft Word itself to help with writing and spell checkers and things like that. So this is kind of, it's already happening, right? And we know students will likely use these, right? Because students are smart and they're innovative many times, and they will push these boundaries of what is academic integrity. And many students, hopefully not all, will ask these questions, right? What are the chances that I will be detected? What are the chances that this is plagiarism? And so some of these bigger theoretical questions are ones we want to bring up here today. And of course, we can look at writing in our own fields. Writing norms, values, practices, expectations differ in education field or history or physics or engineering, right? There's certain different expectations. And so we need to also kind of look at this and say, well, is this going to be something that is going to be more at the discretion of the instructor and the professor in terms of how they view academic integrity in these tools? Or do we perhaps need a more, central policy base and uniformity across institutions or even across countries in terms of what is considered original work, what is considered plagiarism, and things like that. So suffice to say, students will be using this. We don't know exactly what the technology might look like 6 months from now or 3 years from now, but they will be used as well. So here I made up a little case study, which we can use for to prompt discussion later on. So in this example, we have a student named Mike. Mike is a bright young computer programmer studying computer science, but he's also chosen to take some electives to study history. And so he's noticed that his history papers have received kind of low grades so far. He's not the best writer. So he decides to download the GPT-3 source code, and he programs a model for himself because he is a really strong programmer. And so he uses this model, he trains it on historical literature from the period that he wants. And it creates what he thinks to be some very submittable papers. They look good to him. He wants to submit them. However, he wonders if this is plagiarism, because what in his thinking is that he has not written any words for this essay, for this paper that he is going to submit. However, he did write the code. He wrote the code that produced the words, right? And developed the algorithm which produced the paper and the structure by himself. So is this considered, again, from our point of view, whether as an instructor, as a student, is this considered cheating? Because we see a student putting in significant work here, developing a paper and writing, although the writing wasn't code and not in words themselves, and then he submits this paper. So here we can see a student asking this question to himself, perhaps unsure about what academic integrity means, right? But again, this case study is a hypothetical, but it's something that could conceivably happen now, and if not now, in the very near future. So this is just one case study. We'll have a few more after, and we can use these as some prompts, hopefully for some further discussion later on. So again, just to kind of, again, try to think about some of these implications of these technologies for students in particular. Again, building off my previous points, students will use these so long as they find them useful and productive, right? Students will look for things to make their lives easier, to make their lives more efficient, and perhaps to get them better grades and things like that, right? So these text generators, like I mentioned, are and will be used. One of the key concerns here for those of us in academic integrity or in education, we know about these for-profit ghostwriting services, right? These essay mills that exist where students can go and purchase papers. Someone will write them a paper and things like that. And so the issue now is that these companies who offer these services can now do so more efficiently or at a cheaper cost, because they will build their own text generators and outsource them and things like that. And so they will be offering, instead of offering to write a single paper, maybe they'll put out an offer, we'll write your papers for the whole term for X amount of dollars or things like that. So these services stand to proliferate right now because the technology will make them make their services much cheaper. And the cheaper that they are, right, the more perhaps likely that students will go towards them because they're, much cheaper, if not freely accessible. Again, as my case study pointed out, we should ask, what is cheating? As we know, information and education around plagiarism and academic integrity at our institutions is important, making sure that policies are clear, making sure that instructors and students understand these policies. But as the case study highlighted, is it really cheating? What are the boundaries here? And what can we kind of conceptualize? Where is the line per se between original work and and plagiarism? And so the students themselves, as they embark on this this journey, they might not know themselves if they're crossing the line or not. Now we might say, well, that's common sense. You know what cheating is and isn't. But these technologies, I think, blur that line a little bit further. And so that's another point that we should discuss. I see a good question there that I hope to get to after. And again, then we need to discuss the last point there, how do we want to approach these from a policy perspective, right? Is this, how clear and explicit will these have to be? Will institutions need to develop guidelines? How much discretion will instructors receive, and things like that, which we can talk about in the next section a little bit more. Thank you, Ryan. So now let's put on another hat and look at it a bit from the perspective of a teacher or as an educator. In our presentation, we're kind of focusing on higher education here, but of course we can see the applicability readily to K-12 environments and things like that. Again, as we know, students are usually at the vanguard, and typically instructors or educators or institutions are usually more reactive than proactive to these things, right? And so as we see these emerging and as these issues come up and come to our offices probably of academic integrity in time, we'll need to figure out how to deal with them, right? Especially as the technologies also continue to change very rapidly. Today, what's happening now? Well, as instructors, as many of us probably have done, we kind of rely on similar technologies to detect plagiarism, right? So things like Turnitin.com are also improving. As these text generators are improving. So while the algorithms are getting better and better at writing, the other side of the coin is that those sites like Turnitin.com are also using these tools to develop their technology, their counter technologies better as well. So we need to think about moving in those directions and how we would want to use those perhaps as instructors. I think there are some issues there. It's almost kind of fighting fire with fire. As I explain it, but nevertheless, those tools will also be increasingly available to institutions or instructors who want to purchase them. Again, we need to look at these trends a bit unevenly, whether it's K-12 higher education, whether it's in the field of engineering versus English writing or political science, right? Different fields have different writing expectations and how they view, creative writing or technical writing or academic writing. And so different fields may have different perspectives on this, which is, again, a need for further discussion. And again, as I mentioned, we should always think about whether, again, how much discretion as an educator can or should you have over these sort of academic integrity infringements that may emerge. And do we need central guidance, institutional policy that's uniformly applied across the institution or things like that? Or can instructors have some leeway here in terms of how they understand originality, creativity, and expectations of academic writing in their own courses and classes and things like that? Perfect. So here's another case study that we can approach from the perspective of an instructor. So here we have another student, Mike. It's a fairly common name. Mike is an average student, but he's a real critical and divergent thinker. He raises his voice, he thinks in different ways. And so he's working on his paper and he decides to use a text generator to help him complete a 12-page paper on applied ethics. In this paper, he fully cites GPT-3 and he explains thoroughly in his footnotes to the instructor that the machine helped him write about 49% of the paper. So he took 49% from the machine, he did some editing, and then he wrote the rest of the paper himself. And he explains all this with full transparency in this paper to his ethics professor. But from there, he argues that this is an original paper because the text that was generated is fully original, and his editing and his contributions were also original and unique with no cases of plagiarism. And so the instructor is now put in a position where he sees all this, or she sees all this, and finds this paper insightful and provocative, but now is unsure how to evaluate this. Is this fair in terms of the other students in the class who wrote the 12 pages by themselves? If the content of the paper is fully cited and the author has been fully transparent in what they have done, does this negate an academic integrity infringement or any other ethical violations? And questions such as that. So here again, we see a position that an instructor could be put in. Again, now we're in the very near future where a student has written the majority of the paper, just not the whole paper. He or she had some help. Mike was assisted by the algorithm here. But Mike also explained what he did, and thus, he's adhering to guidelines and citations and things like that. So again, I think another little question that we can think about and have some further discussion on as we move forward. So again, some implications here that we can begin to conceptualize in the short term. Right now, probably many educators are unaware of these developments, hence the need for workshops such as this, or else institutional guidance on how to approach these things, right? And so in the short term, cases like that may pop up in academic integrity offices, and we may not be sure how to deal with them as they are sort of new cases that we would not have seen in the past. What could happen in higher education? I think this answers one of the questions that was posed there is we might be forced to move back towards what I call analog solutions, going back to paper and pencil writing, going back to having in-person exams or having students have to write an essay over a course of several hours in some sort of enclosed environment and things like that. And so this is a question that we should ask ourselves. Again, we'll get into some broader questions around technology later on, but perhaps this is what we may have to do, at least in the short term, until we have the answers to some of these questions. On the other side of the coin, perhaps it's not all bad, right? Educators may choose to instead use these technologies and integrate them into their teaching and learning and writing practices, right? Showing students how these tools can help them with the writing, perhaps assist them to become better writers, using tighter scaffolding so that they can see students progress through the writing throughout the semester. Educators may choose to use technologies that are coming out that automate grading and make their lives easier as they grade papers and things like that. So we can look at some of the opportunities inherent here before, but again, there are many concerns here. And then finally, again, this broader sort of, theoretical question is, what are our values and sort of paradigms around how we understand and evaluate what we consider to be academic writing? The assessment and the evaluation piece now becomes front and center. We know that different instructors and different disciplines differ on some of these perspectives, but we're really getting into this question now of what is academic writing? And if we have something called academic writing, how do we best assess and evaluate it in light of these developments? And so finally, I think a third perspective here, which we need to think about, especially for those in academia and those who operate as researchers, is that we are not immune to this. And these sort of ethical integrity questions have and will emerge for researchers as well. So they will also be implicated as researchers can and probably will use some of these tools and softwares as they write and things like that. And so this already occurred way back in 2005, long time before GPT-3. A group of researchers at MIT, what they did is they developed a program which generated some writing scientific papers, which they then submitted to journals. The point here was that they submitted these papers to predatory journals, which is a separate issue, but they were trying to, shed light on how these predatory journals will take in any paper and their peer review process is flawed and things like that. But nevertheless, they made it through peer review and those papers were published and you can go online and read them and things like that. So this has already happened, 15 years ago. And so we can imagine that some researchers may continue to develop writing tools and things like that as in the publication process. Again, thinking about this in different disciplines and what is considered, a publishable manuscript and things like that, and what are different norms and thinking around that, as well as looking at some of the positive and negative implications. There are some implications here for research, both good and bad, that I'll talk about in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. So another case study, although bringing up some similar issues. So we have now Mike. Mike is, a bright and intrepid scholar, working his way up the ladder of academia, hoping to secure a tenure track position. He realizes that one of the best ways to do this is to publish. And so he needs to get out as many articles, essays, and books as he can. And so what he does is he has a programmer that he knows create a custom GPT3 tool, which focuses on educational literature and automates his writing. So because this tool is focused on his area of expertise and his area of research, he's able to write much more quickly. Perhaps this program generates his literature review automatically, and helps him with his introduction and discussion points and things like that. And so his writing is sped up exponentially. And so he's able to submit more and more papers for publication, and many of these manuscripts end up passing peer review. However, as his CV begins to grow and grow and grow in this world, he begins to wonder, is this behavior really ethical? What would his colleagues think? Or if he was applying for that tenure track job, what would the hiring committee think about this if they found out? Or not. And so he's concerned here that maybe he's doing the right thing for his career, but at the same time, maybe he's crossing an ethical line. Maybe he's not sure, because competition for these positions is also stiff. And he knows that maybe some of his colleagues are using these technologies in their own writing and things like that. So again, in this hypothetical scenario, which may or may not be related to my own employment situation and career, I can't, but we could see this happening, right? Especially under current models, right, where we know that in academia, publications are, a type of currency, and they're valued and things like that, and there is, often pressure to put out material and things like that. Thanks, Ryan. So again, as a researcher, if you work in academia, you can ask yourself, would you use these tools and to assist research and writing? And as a little joke there, many of us already are. Again, as I mentioned, these writing tools and predictive text are being integrated more and more into things like Microsoft Word, right? We've used spell checkers and things like that for many years now. Grammarly can be incorporated to help you with your writing, and things like that, right? There's a bunch of tools here that we could use, and these tools or services will get better. Right, and it depends on, I think, what are the incentives, right, to use these in the research process, whether for good or bad per se, depending on where we want to discuss or place our ethics. For example, there are some positives in there for sure. I'm thinking as a qualitative researcher, because of these tools, transcription is getting better and better, to the point where a good transcription of your interviews and things will be fully automated and generated. Again, this is already happening, and so that's nice as a qualitative researcher to not have to necessarily go through the labor of transcribing and things like that. And we can see other ways that these tools might be developed to help complete a accurate or a focused literature review, filling out forms. Imagine if some of these tools will help you with your grant applications, which we know are cumbersome, or to fill out an ethics review form to automate that process to save you time. As well as perhaps when you're applying to journals, they might use these as a screening tool for peer review processes as well. So we know now in the private sector, for instance, many companies use tools such as these to screen resumes. So first you have to get through the algorithm. If your resume makes it through the algorithm, then a human will look at it. I could see something similar being applied to the peer review process as well. A final few concerns there are republication and sharing of work. I think that's interesting. As Ryan pointed out, many of these algorithms are trained on open access writing, and thus starting to ask questions, I think, around open access. And do you want your papers to be allowed to be trained by these algorithms? I noticed an interesting thing recently, where last year I published an article in University Affairs around this topic. And what I found is within a few weeks, there was 3 or 4 or 5 articles that looked just like mine, but the wording was different on different websites. And as far as I can tell, these websites have used some sort of generative text tool to take my paper and to change some of the words in it and then republish it somewhere else. So again, a little bit outside the scope here, but these are, I think there are questions of open access and where we as researchers want our writing to be. And perhaps a push back in recent years, I think we pushed towards open access, which I think is a good thing, but now there may be some pushback depending on where you want your writing to be and who can access it and things like that. Finally, as my case points out, some questions are on hiring and promotion, as well as I think we need to think about this sort of publish or perish model, especially if these tools allow researchers and academics to push out more and more papers even faster than before. We all know what this kind of looks like in academia for those of us implicated in this as well. So again, I think most of the people in this room I've seen in the chat box are already thinking about some of these questions. And so we can, I'll go over these just very quickly, just to provide a sort of conceptual basis for further discussion. The first one, of course, is our definitions of academic integrity and plagiarism. I really do think these technologies are sort of paradigm shifting, and we will have to rethink what we define as academic integrity and plagiarism. Of course, as experts like Sarah, I believe, no doubt, there is no universal definition, and the academic integrity can be looked at as an evolving process and things like that, and this might be part of that evolution. It's not clear whether our current definitions suffice in light of these new technologies. As already mentioned, we need to perhaps further think about student writing, evaluation, and assessment in terms of academic papers, academic scholarship, and what that means and how we evaluate it. As Ryan pointed out, with tech like this being available, do word counts still really matter? Or perhaps, are we going to need to look for something else in student writing and things like that? These are, sort of new questions, as well as around our teaching and pedagogical writing practices. As an educator, would you allow your students to use these tools? Would you encourage them as part of their writing process? Or would you resort, as I mentioned, to analog solutions and say, no, you need to learn how to write with a pen and pencil, and you need to learn to come up with your own ideas and how to construct an argument and things like that yourself. Again, these are questions now for educators. I think there's emerging questions as well for research ethics in terms of doing research in this area. Where is information being drawn from, being shared, and things like that? That connects largely to privacy concerns and things like that. I'll give you an example. I work with a lot of international students. Many of them have to use a VPN, right? So a private server to enable to access my courses from their countries because of political or state reasons. And thus I'm concerned for some of them when they submit their writing, if that writing is going to be downloaded into some sort of database attached with their name on it that someone might access, or that these algorithms could push out in some way, shape, or form, and things like that. So we can talk a little bit more about technology and privacy, which I think is an interesting area. But there are concerns here as well in terms of where this writing is landing and who has access to it and for what purposes and things like that. And so what we're really getting into is that big discussion that we know is emerging around artificial intelligence and, in this case, higher education. So again, just because I don't want to take up too much time, these could be points for discussion. As I mentioned, we need to start to think about copyright and intellectual property. And so these are more ethical and legal dimensions that are emerging. And so questions there are that, if an algorithm, if a robot produces something, say a paper or an essay, who owns that paper? Can you copyright something that is not human and claim ownership of it? And questions such as that. So these are emerging legal issues around copyright and intellectual property in relation to things that algorithms are producing. Another theoretical question is what I call the automation of authorship. And depending on, again, how these tools evolve and what they might look like, it might be the case where everybody can be a good author, whether they use these tools 100% or just 10% and do the rest themselves. What happens when, anybody can produce a book, a quote unquote original book in a day, and things like that. Can everybody be an author? And if they can be, can they all be a good author? And if they can be, what does that mean? Finally, evolving notions of creativity and thinking about the creative process, I think is very interesting here. Ryan pointed out DALL-E, which is, again, you can input text and say, I want a picture of this, and it'll create all these original images and things like that. So this is very interesting for how we think about creativity and the creative process. There's other people in Hollywood are using these tools to help them write screenplays. And they look at the data from different famous movies and see where engagement is high, and doing all kinds of interesting things around that for screenwriting and screenplays and things like that. Again, quickly, reconceptualize originality. There's emerging perspectives talking about co-creators, saying, well, we can't ignore the role of AI. This is sort of that idea of blending humans and computers meshing together, right? Becoming part human, part computer, whatever that might mean, and looking at technology and humans as co-creators of knowledge. And this will be the dominant paradigm, perhaps moving forward. And then finally, thinking about quality, quantity of writing. Again, for academics, this publish or perish model, looking at writing in terms of time and expectations, in terms of efficiency, and what are the incentives for good writing, and things like that. I think these are questions for students, for educators, and academics that we can get into further. So finally here, just as a quick point of conclusion, looking forward, as we've tried to do, just me and Ryan have had many conversations here. I tend to take a little more critical, pessimistic view of technologies and their implications, while Ryan tends to take a little more optimistic view. And so we'll give our kind of two perspectives over the conversations and debates we've had over the last, I think it's been almost a year now or so since we connected. So, I'm concerned about many of the things that I outlined. I've been heavily influenced by authors like Susanna Zuboff, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which I highly recommend to anyone interested in looking at tech today. And as she outlines, these ideas of data surveillance, privacy risks, profit motives, and things like that are very kind of dangerous in many different ways. And I think this applies to education as well. These tools are being built largely for profit and for money making by many companies, and we know that there will be other illicit activities involved in that. Right? We're looking at what could evolve into a technological sort of arms race between these tools and Turnitin.coms and things like that, where educators are kind of stuck in the middle of this and trying to figure out what to do. And things like that. And I think it also asks us to ask a lot of big questions around educational technology, which many of us have recently because of COVID and things like that, moving online. As Ryan pointed out, if you know your students and you know how they write, it's a bit different. What if you're teaching a huge class or you're teaching all online? You don't get to know the students perhaps in the same way as in an online environment versus an in-person environment, and things such as that. And I do think that many institutions moving forward, I don't know what the time period is, will move towards these more analog type of solutions because they will be stuck with how to confront this, and they won't be able to find perhaps better solutions rather than resorting back to pencil and paper and exams and types of things. So those are my prognostications. I'm more, I don't want to say cynical, but a little more pessimistic, I think. But nevertheless, I think the gist of what I've tried to outline here is that these sort of tools and technologies are at our doorstep. And so we need to try and be as ahead of the curve as much as we can be, because they will be confronted in our classrooms and schools very shortly.
Thanks, Mike. Again, definitely a lot of what Mike is saying is I do agree with to some degree. I think there's kind of going to be two effects, and I'd like to kind of use the example of the calculator as an example. So the calculator, when it came around, it did make individuals worse at mental math, right? If the need for that disappeared, so people become worse at it. That's just natural. What happens with any any sort of innovation, once something is automated, humans immediately use their brain for something else. However, mathematically, the calculator was a bit of a boon for math studies. We were now able to do more things faster. We're able to move things forward as a result. And that's what I'm hoping that this technology does, is that it does move forward what what we value as language arts educators. Why are we stuck? Why have we been stuck on the same form, the essay, for the last, however long we've been teaching the essay? Why are things the way they are? And when you look at some of this text, it's like going back and reading like your undergrad papers, and you see, sorry, I hope I'm not offending anyone in doing an undergraduate degree right now, but when you look at papers that you wrote when you were younger, you're kind of confronted with the mistakes, and you say, oh, I hope I don't do that anymore. Maybe I don't do that. I definitely shouldn't be doing that, and you make a change. So that's something that I'm hoping that this does, but that's based on the conversation continuing, this technology proliferating, and that's kind of my next step, is to continue to show this to as many people as possible. I think hiding it is, I think that's going to be a very big fallacy if we pretend this technology doesn't exist and we stick with the status quo. Yeah, I think that's the main thing I wanted to add as far as where I see this going. I think we have time for some questions still.
Yeah, we've had lots of questions come in. Some of them you've answered, but I'll ask some of them. Yes, absolutely fascinating. I have to tell you, throughout the whole webinar series, I've often left the webinars myself feeling like energized or wanting to learn more. And I got to tell you, I feel like a little depressed this time. Whew, man, I mean, having a language arts background, right? So I'm going to start with one of the questions that came in with Milan, and then another comment from Margaret sort of echoed it. And Milan asked, but if the tech is available to everyone, aren't we all on equal footing? And sort of along that same line, Margaret's asked, as she commented, that many people use calculators. And isn't this sort of like a calculator in a way? So I'll let you comment on that, and I'll go back and curate some more of the questions and comments that came in.
Yeah, I didn't see that comment about the calculator, but interesting that that's where I went with it as well. I think there's a little bit of validation for OpenAI doing this the way they did, that we all have access to it, and that it's not in the hands of, behind shadowy governments and corporations, and that it's open. I think it's a good thing, because it is, like you said, it's equal footing.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much more to add. Again, I think these questions again are broad, but they lead us back to these bigger and bigger questions around, like, if you're asking your student to write something, what is the purpose of you asking them to write this essay, right? Is it to demonstrate knowledge of the content area? Is it to demonstrate that they are able to construct a logical argument? Is it to demonstrate that they are able to write in a persuasive manner, to create original ideas, to contribute to the knowledge base and things like that? And so I think beyond that, we're asking sort of these big questions around, whether it's the purpose of an assignment or really the purpose of an education per se, specifically in terms of writing and what we expect of our students of writing, and why we ask them to do these things, especially in light of, well, if a student can just get a 20-page paper created for them in 10 seconds, it asks us then to say, well, perhaps we don't need a 20-page paper, we need a good 5-page paper, or something like that, that we know can be written by hand, and that we know we can evaluate more readily than as instructors. We are all under constrictions and restraints as well. right? And so that's why I tried to add in the multiple perspectives from students and educators as well, because again, we're both going to be part of this. And we both kind of, in a way, I guess I would say we have to work together to figure out these answers.
And it kind of leads into another question that Anita asked, and she's kind of posed a logical pedagogical question. It says, well, shouldn't we just be teaching this technology to our students? Shouldn't we be teaching them how to use it?
I'm starting in September.
Wow, well, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I've been lucky. My administration has been very supportive. So I'm going to be doing two things. I'm going to be teaching college level communication classes and then use this as, okay, this computer writes better than you. Figure out what you're going to do. Can you tell the difference? So I am going to be using it as a context. And then also I've got some time to, some course development time to develop a short, there'll be some online and, basically create a module for identifying this text and being exposed to it.
We've had questions and comments coming in around contract cheating. So what are the implications of this kind of technology for contract cheating? And I'm going to extend that and add on to that for, Mike mentioned the writing of academic articles. So what are your thoughts on how this is connected, if at all, to contract cheating?
Yeah, as I mentioned, and I think the comments are in line with that. My prognostication is that it's going to open up that market significantly, at least in the short term, because those people who provide those products and services have an incentive now to enhance their products and services, to offer them more cheaply, to have quicker turnaround time, and all of those kinds of things. So at least in the short term. And especially as they need to set the time to train GPT-3 and things like that, that is probably where it will go. Perhaps in the longer term, these tools will be free, really readily accessible, and that could upend the contract cheating market, where students now, through a quick Google search or whatever, can have access to a lot of these tools for free. Which would be interesting, because if they are freely available, then there perhaps is no longer need for the contract cheating market, because I can get a free essay that's more or less as good as someone who would write it for me, perhaps, and thus I'm not going to spend the money on that thing. But then again, we get back to this question that's there as well: is then am I cheating as a student? Is my behavior ethical, and things like that. So in the short term, I think these companies will capitalize on this trend, but in the long term, it could actually upend their industry and their business model.
Well, and you kind of led once again into the next question, which is, how does this disrupt our definition of academic integrity? I have some thoughts on it, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, I would actually defer to you, Sarah, and so I definitely want to hear your thoughts on that with your expertise. But again, I don't, I think we always have to take technology with a grain of salt, right? Anyone who's seeking to profit off of a new tool or service is going to market it that it's revolutionary, it's groundbreaking, it's the bee's knees, whatever, to age myself, things like that, right? And so we do have to take these things with a grain of salt. And as Ryan pointed out, right, these tools are not perfect. They're not going to replace, a piece of exceptional written literature and things like that yet. However, I do kind of buy into the hype a little bit, is that this is going to be paradigm shifting. And this again gets back to these broader questions around AI and society, right? Are robots going to take our jobs? And all these huge questions that we're going to be encountering soon. And I think for academic integrity, I feel like these developments are kind of groundbreaking, because we really have to now distinguish what is human and what is inhuman. And where, again, is that line, I think someone asked earlier. And then, of course, then how do we define academic integrity, as well as its policy and enforcement and things like that? So if Ryan has anything to add, I would defer to you, Sarah, to give your perspective on this with your expertise.
My main thing is, I already mentioned it, and it's just that it's going to be a push. It's going to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but essay mills are, like, illegal in Australia. So that sort of the conversation becoming bigger to the point that this is something that's happening with our lawmakers, and that it's not just a conversation that we're having around the coffee pot in our offices, complaining about, oh, the students cheat, students cheat. I think this is going to push that conversation forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'll add in some comments as the host, because at the beginning I talked about the book launch that's coming up, and I end the book in the chapter 12 by sort of pointing to the future of academic integrity and assert that machine learning and artificial intelligence will pose the greatest challenges to academic integrity. We don't know yet what it will be. As I was finishing writing the book, I was paying attention to things like this, knowing that the webinar was coming up and we were starting our conversations maybe about a year ago, and that these features, this technology will be integrated into products like Word. And it will be soon as ubiquitous as spell check and grammar check, and that the lines between machine and human will become blurred. And so that line of where does the human end and the machine begin, I think will be very difficult to decipher. And in my book, I sort of contemplate a question that I didn't answer. I've sort of left it for the experts in the field to contemplate, which is what will it mean to live in a post-plagiarism world? Because I think that's what we're going to be looking at. Is a world where we're no longer talking about plagiarism because it's so integrated with machine assisted. I spent 15 years teaching second languages, and there was the MAL, and the CAL, the computer assisted language learning, and the mobile assisted language learning. And I think there's a new MAL, and it's the machine assisted language learning and writing, and not even assisted. It's just it'll be integrated. So this is, it's fascinating. It's a conundrum. I don't have any answers. I think it will pose a challenge to those of us who work in academic integrity, because I think cut and paste plagiarism is going to be so far in the past very quickly that we're going to need to grapple with it. I'm looking at the questions here. I kind of lost track of some of the questions. But yeah, written follow-up, video quizzes, oral exams, all of these are being talked about as possible forms of assessment, going back to pen and paper, as you talked about. These to me seem to be things that have been tried, but I wonder about what are the things we haven't tried yet in terms of assessment. I don't know what that looks like. What do you guys think?
Yeah, just as students are bright and intrepid, and they'll find ways to use this text, teachers are no slouches, and they will find ways to develop effective pedagogical strategies to attempt to negate them, and things like that. But again, it goes back to sort of these bigger questions and things like that. For example, if you're an instructor now or in this brave new world, perhaps you will have your students just write one paper throughout the semester, but they have to develop and scaffold on that paper and then do perhaps a presentation or an oral quiz or whatever it might be, rather than asking them to write 3 or 4 papers, because we will know in this new world that those papers are very likely to be not original, or automated, whatever it might be. And things like that. I've been thinking, same like you, Sarah, about this post-plagiarism world and things like that. And I'm hoping, as a student of history and at that pendulum, for example, as an academic, if things like this might push us back to more slower or qualitative dimensions. For example, having academics being expected to write 1 good paper a year that goes through a very rigorous peer review process. And things like that. And if you can accomplish that, you are considered a solid scholar, rather than being expected to pump out volumes and things like that. Right. So I'm thinking again in terms of scholarship and things like that, what that might mean for researchers and academics in the future as well. Because we know now, I saw something, I think like there's over 30,000 journals out there on the internet now producing over 2 million academic articles a year. Right? Keeping anyone who works in any field knows just keeping up with the literature in your field is almost impossible these days alone, right? Just because of the volumes of written work that are coming out. And if more and more is coming out, well, then how do we start to kind of either shrink that or compartmentalize it and things like that. So I'm hoping, while there are dangers here and problems, I'm hoping maybe looking at long term, these things might swing back in some good directions for academia as well.
Ryan, any closing thoughts?
No, someone just did message me and asked about the course that and I actually have a meeting with them in 15 minutes with my group that we're discussing this this future module or course. So maybe I'll be able to share that a little bit more about that in the near future.
Great. Well, that sounds like a terrific place to wrap up. Thank you so much for your presentation. I learned tons. I'm a little bit afraid, but also excited and trying to navigate all that. I think I'm probably not the only one. So thank you again for your wonderful presentation, for taking the time today to share your expertise with us. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.